Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Plug In, your virtual connection to Tulane. Tonight, we're discussing return to professional sports, the new normal. I am Dr. Greg Stewart, co-director and co-founder of the Tulane Center for Sport. Our panelists tonight, introduce them. First is Eric Beverly. He currently serves as the Director of Operations at the Tulane University Center for Sport, where he oversees the daily operations of all center-related programs. He's a native of Cleveland, Ohio, and has a background in athletic administration. Prior to his time at Tulane, Eric served as Assistant Athletics Director for Student Services at the University of Texas. And before arriving at Texas, he spent 5 years at the University of Georgia as Director of Academics for Football and Academic Counselor for Soccer. Eric played 10 years in the National Football League, playing both offensive line and tight end. He began his professional career as an undrafted free agent with the Detroit Lions. After spending 7 seasons in Detroit, he joined the Atlanta Falcons before retiring in 2007. And had the honor of coming to New Orleans for that first game post-Katrina. Sorry, Eric, had to go there. Eric demonstrated his value and versatility on and off the field during his time playing in the NFL by completing the Harvard Business School's NFL Business Management and Entrepreneurial Program. In addition, his professional off-season experiences included internships with the NFL League Office, Georgia Pacific, as well as serving elected terms as a team representative with the NFL Players Association. Welcome, Eric. Next is Shelly Cayette, who is a Senior Vice President for the Cleveland Cavaliers Global Corporate Partnerships Department, where she started with the organization in August of 2012. Shelly oversees the Corporate Partnership Department, including 40-plus team members that span across the Cleveland Cavaliers NBA, the Cleveland Monsters AHL, the Canton Charge, the G League, and the Cavs Legion Esports. Her responsibilities include leading key personnel to drive brand campaigns and platforms for clients, cultivate new business and new business partnerships for the organization, as well as retain and grow current partner revenue and brand strategies. Shelly comes from New Orleans, Louisiana, where she held positions in marketing, sponsorship, and community investment for the former New Orleans Hornets, now the New Orleans Pelicans, for the last 8 years prior to moving to Cleveland, Ohio. She didn't put in here, but Shelly is also a former Tulane athlete, women's basketball team. Native of Louisiana, graduated from the A.B. Freeman School of Business in New Orleans with a BA in Marketing and Management, and currently resides in downtown Cleveland. Thank you, Shelly. Colie Edison joins us. She's the CEO of the Professional Bowlers Association and Chief Customer Officer for Bowlero Corp. Colie is responsible for the global marketing efforts of both professional bowling's Major League and the worldwide leader in bowling entertainment, media, and events. Colie joined Bowlero Corporation in 2008 and has held Director, Brand Strategy, and VP of Marketing titles since then. In her first year as CEO of the PBA, Colie's worked to reinvigorate the sport while reaching new audiences and engaging its thousands of members across the globe. She earned her bachelor's degree in communication from Tulane University. So welcome, Colie, to tonight. Dan Friel is a 2004 graduate of Tulane Law School. After graduating from Tulane, Dan worked as Assistant District Attorney in Suffolk County in Boston and returned to New Orleans in 2007 to work as an Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Louisiana, where he prosecuted public corruption and white-collar crime until launching TBT in 2014. In addition to his roles as TBT's co-founder and general counsel, Dan oversees all aspects of TBT's team relationships. He currently lives in New Orleans. Welcome, Dan. and Jennifer Goldstein, who I had to actually do a little work on. Jennifer graduated from Tulane Law School in 1995 with a certificate in sports law program. She interned with World Cup Soccer, was editor-in-chief of the Sports Lawyers Journal, and is active in Sports Lawyers Association. Jennifer represents combat athletes, primarily UFC fighters and professional boxers, as a partner with CAA's combat division. So Jennifer, welcome. At this point, I am happy to introduce Gabe Feldman, the director of Tulane Sports Law Program, my co-host tonight, and co-founder and co-director of the Center for Sport. Gabe, welcome as well.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to all our panelists. I just want to say for the record that I also started my NFL career as an undrafted free agent. Didn't go beyond that, but Eric and I have a lot in common there. And I'm excited for tonight. We've got as you just heard, a really good group of panelists and lots of different perspectives to talk about in terms of how we return to sports, how we have returned to sports, what sports are going to look like, or professional sports are going to look like in the future. And I encourage everybody who's listening, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I'll be following the chat and happy to ask the questions of the panelists as we go along. So let me start with Jennifer. And Jennifer, who has been a incredible supporter of Tulane Law School and the Tulane Sports Law Program, and a great mentor for a lot of our students. And I have learned a lot from Jennifer. I've now known her for a long time. And so Jennifer, thank you for all that you've done and continue to do for our program. And thank you for taking the time to be on here. And I want to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about how UFC and combat sports returned to play, particularly given that UFC was the first organization to stage a major pro sports event in the US post-shutdown in March. And if you can talk a little bit about the willingness of fighters to return and the precautions that were put in place and how everything was balanced against the health risks.
Thanks, Gabe, and thanks for that. That was all too kind. As you can imagine, fighters for the most part aren't fair to their physical well-being. So I don't know of any fighters who feared coming back because of the virus itself. There were several who were derailed because their gym had been closed for the pandemic and they were training in a garage, they made weight, they felt like they had a full camp. There were certainly those for whom the coaches were older, unable to travel, or ill, they had been exposed, et cetera. So that took a lot of the fighters out. Many had never fought without their family or friends or particular coaches or corners there. And so that pulled out some fighters. But for the most part, I don't know that there were many fears of the virus itself. UFC would take credit for that. I think they did implement a wide-ranging testing protocol.
Jennifer, sorry, hold on one second. I just wanted to make sure this wasn't my. I think your audio is cutting out a little. Is there? Can you move the antenna on top of the TV screen?
Can you hear me? Is that better?
That I think is better. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I don't think any fighters were worried, as concerned about fighting because
I think we lost you again.
Oh no. No? Still no?
Let's try that now.
Good?
Okay, I think so.
I'll just reiterate for those who couldn't hear that I don't think most of the fighters were concerned about the virus itself, but rather all the ancillary matters that came from the pandemic. There was a structural change for many of them with regard to fight camps and their weight cuts, which were in many cases harder because they didn't have the same gym access and training access they previously had. The UFC did a lot of tests And for the first fight, they didn't keep anybody isolated. The first fight in Jacksonville, everybody was just staying in an open hotel. That was because Florida Commission allowed, when they moved to their own facility in Las Vegas, where the Nevada Commission was more stringent. But at least in Nevada, they were actually, fighters and licensed foreigners were all in the same place, all the same hotel. They weren't allowed to leave the vicinity of the hotel, which posed its own problems because fighters opposing one another were staying, they had to segregate them by floor, but they'd still meet in the common areas. And because they were contained, it was somebody saying I should disconnect.
Oh, sorry, we just got another, apparently it's the, well, how about this? Do you want to try to, this is a good suggestion by Ruthie Bailey. Try to disconnect and reconnect, and then I'll come back to you.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, sorry, everybody. So let me go to Dan, and Dan has also been a good friend and a great supporter and mentor of a lot of Tulane sports law students. So all the nice things I said about Jennifer, I also will say about Dan. And I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, but Dan, I hadn't met him. He came by my office and said, hey, I want to talk to you about an idea I'm working on with some friends. It's about a winner-take-all basketball tournament, sort of combination of American Idol and I forget how else you pitched it. And I thought, this is the best idea I've ever heard. But you know, you're an assistant U.S. attorney. What are you doing? And here he is. It's been incredible to watch TBT grow. And tell us about you had to do a truncated field. You had to change the timing, but it ended up being the show on air because so few other sports were playing, and you were on the ESPN networks. Tell us a little bit about how you pull off the TBT, and there were so many eyes on you to see if this could actually happen. And before the NBA bubble, there was the TBT bubble. So talk about the decisions that went in there, how you pulled it off, the lessons you learned, and just how you go from being an AUSA to helping run a unique sporting event like TBT. You're on mute. The sound is perfect, but you're muted.
The answer to the last question first, I guess, is just kind of luck and circumstance, and having an idea that a buddy of mine and I, that we've been friends with since we were 12, came up with. I mean, that's kind of the short answer to that part. In terms of trying to pull off TBT this year, the thing that we put first was trying to secure the event and make it healthy and safe for everyone, and make the players and the participants feel comfortable first, and then worry about how the event would take place. So as the spring progressed, it became obvious that there was only one way to really accomplish at least any kind of physical contact sport, which was going to be under a quarantine. And so as we started to develop the plan, it became obvious that the structure that we typically would have, which mimics in a lot of ways what they do in March Madness, is to have regional events in various locations around the country, was just unrealistic. It became too unwieldy to think that we could do 4 to 8 sites at the same time, both from a staffing perspective and a cost perspective, and also the variability from one state to the other with respect to where they were in terms of their reopening, if at all, where they were in terms of their viral load and all that kind of stuff. So what we started to figure out was, it was obvious that we needed to be in one location to do it, and we probably made that specific call early to mid-May. I think May 15th was the date that we had in mind as when we were going to make that decision. And then from that point, it really was a mad dash to find the proper location where we could actually implement all of these things that we had been planning over the previous 3 months. And so from that point, it really was a matter of just finding that perfect spot and being able to execute the way that we needed to. And we were very lucky, I think, in the sense that we had a lot of people involved that really wanted to do it. And that, to me, I think, was the number one thing that allowed us to be able to play those games over that 10 to 11 day period, was the fact that we had 400 plus people, from TBT staff to players to coaches to the TV production crew, all of whom were under quarantine with us, that wanted to be there. There wasn't any reluctance or reticence. And part of that is, how our event is structured. it's a winner takes all, and it's elimination over the course of several months. Teams naturally weed themselves out. And so because of that, we were left with a pool of teams and players that really, really, really wanted to play basketball on a high profile stage. And so I think that really helped us a lot.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And correct me if I'm wrong, but also the system was unique in that when a team lost, they left.
Yes.
They physically
yes.
left the bubble.
Yeah. So we had one hotel and we had everybody pack their bags. So before the game, everybody had to have all of their bags packed, win or lose. And the losers' bags were brought to the hotel across the street. And I was, I get the role of walking the teams back. We didn't use any buses. And so I was walking these loser teams back to we were staying at the Hyatt, and there was a Hilton across the street. And so the losing teams would go to the Hilton and their bags would be waiting for them there. They would literally, it was like Little League. They would walk back from Nationwide Arena up Nationwide Avenue in Columbus, Ohio, downtown Columbus, Ohio, and then walk in their full uniforms, all sweaty and disgusting and irritated because they had just lost, back to the Hilton. And then their bags would be waiting for them back there. But that was part of our protocol. That was both a health safety thing as well as a security issue, is that when teams lose in our event, they tend to get pretty upset. Although this year, more so than ever before, in my view. But we wanted to make sure that they had a safe place to go for themselves as well as everybody else that was involved.
Yeah, it's incredible. Well, congrats on pulling off a successful event and doing it safely. Let me go to Colie and tell us how the pandemic has impacted the return of the PBA and what changes you've made. And I'm also curious to hear, as somebody who's at the top of the organization, who made the decisions? How much input did you receive from outside folks, and what do things look like now?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, and great question. So back on March 15th, we were actually in the midst of our World Series of Bowling live from Las Vegas. So we had thousands of people in Vegas because this is a multi-week tournament. And then we were gearing up to be live on FS1 on Sunday. So it was a matter of, by March 11th, when obviously was really the day that everything started happening, between March 11th and March 15th, it was hour by hour. What are we going to do? Are we going to keep this going? Do we keep the players in Vegas? Do we send everybody home? So the way the World Series of Bowling works, I know you probably all know this, but I'll just repeat it anyway, is that we have, the animal pattern tournaments, which are like a chameleon pattern and the cheetah pattern, and then you have the world championship. So that's the big one. So what we decided to do was move that one up to Sunday when it was really going to be on Thursday, and we sent everybody else home. I was on one of the last flights out to Vegas. We did that tournament, and then everybody went home, and we really postponed this season. So we were actually the last live sporting event on Fox Sports, which is pretty cool. This all happened 6 months after my company acquired the PBA, and I had only been in the CEO position for 6 months. So I always say that we were on a roll. We really were. Viewership is 50% up year over year. And then it was really just about, what do we do? How do we get back? So we're a little bit different than basketball or combat sports in that this is a no contact sport. We're also very niche. So we're able to play around with our formats and find the best way to bring our product to the largest audience possible. So for us, it was about creativity and flexibility. We knew we could not do our large scale tournaments where we bring in thousands of regional players and then it ultimately goes into a stepladder final. And so what I did was develop 2 essentially made for TV events. We were back on in June, and we partnered closely with Fox Sports to get these dates. And we kind of saw this as an opportunity. I was able to do 2 nights on Big Fox on a Saturday night in prime time, which is really hard for the PBA to get. We don't get these type of windows. So it was like, if Fox is going to give this to me, I got to figure out the best way to give them the best content and to reach our audience. So we ended up going down to Florida, as Jennifer alluded to earlier, because the governor there said pro sports are an essential business and invited us to come down. Bolero Corp, as Dr. Stewart talked about earlier, is the parent company of the PBA. We own and operate 300 bowling centers. So we're able to go to one of my bowling centers, which was closed to the public. So there was a lot of factors in play. And then once we were on site,
we had only 8 competitors for one event and 10 for another. There was no sharing of equipment. There was temperature taking before people came in, PPE, but we don't have the funding to do widespread testing that the NBA can do, or, MLB. So it was really about, doing health screenings, temperature checks, PPE, and ultimately just limiting the amount of people on site. So really reduced crew, really reduced staff. And like I said, the formats were just so that 2 players were on the approach at a time. They couldn't share equipment. There was usually they bring their friends and family. There were no fans. The biggest difference, I'd say, though, from the MLB or the NBA is that fans don't contribute to our revenue. That's not part of our model. We don't need 40,000 people in a stadium. We usually have 200 people in a bowling center. So the miss there was really the vibe, and we spoke to that by creating LED screens behind the lanes, on the side of the lanes. And so we just made it work. And to your earlier question, Gabe, the ultimate decision came down to me. It was something that I wrestled with. Not only are we the professional, league of bowling, but we also do the regional tournaments as well. And so recently I had set up one of our PBA 50, which is where our 50 and over bowlers are bowling, and they were supposed to be down in the Villages in Florida. I had 194 people registered to bowl, the likes of Norm Duke and Walter Ray Williams Jr. and Pete Weber, and I canceled it last week. And that was really hard because I know that these guys wanted to bowl, but I just said, I can't live with that on my conscience of having 194 senior citizens bowling in a closed building and what might happen. So the decisions are mine to make, but it's not been an easy process.
Yeah, thank you, Colie. That's really interesting, and it's remarkable the decisions that people have to make these days, and I applaud you for thinking about the safety of the athletes, and I can't imagine for both you and for Dan the legal issues that well beyond what we have time to talk about tonight. But I just want to highlight one point you made that's fascinating, is the different revenue models for different sports and how much particular sports or leagues depend on live attendance and ticket sales versus TV revenue, and how that might impact some of the decisions that are coming up. So on that note, let me go to Shelly, and then I'll come back to Jennifer, and hopefully Jennifer's Wi-Fi will be better. But so Shelly, on the revenue question, tell us the impact that the pandemic, please tell us the impact that the pandemic has had on business development, corporate partnerships, everything you deal with from the Cavs. And have you seen a difference among the different sports that you work with? To Colie's, to the point we're just making with Colie, that the PBA has different issues in terms of fan attendance versus TBT versus the NBA versus Major League Baseball versus college football. I imagine the sports that you oversee in the different leagues have different revenue issues and different corporate sponsorships and different needs. So can you kind of paint us the picture of how it's impacted the Cavs and then the other sports you deal with as well?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Gabe and Dr. Stewart, for the introduction. It's great to be here with fellow Tulane alumni. And so, I'll reiterate what a lot of the others are saying of how the pandemic has really impacted us right away. I would say the biggest impact is that right when this happened, it impacted team members, right? For us, the date was March 11th. Kind of where were you on that date, right? We remember the NBA announced a player that was tested positive, and it seems like from then, when you look at across the country, businesses started to shut down, schools, it kind of was a trickle-down effect. So that for us was very impactful, and we knew right away the biggest impact was on our team members, which then, by the way, impacts business, right? And so our decisions changed. Not that they weren't before, but really started to even more heavier, I would say, focus on team members. We were in the middle that day of a Mid-American Conference, a MAC tournament that was going on in our arena, while we were in a boardroom figuring out how we were going to move 400 team members to work from home and making sure they had the technology and the resources to say hey, you're leaving, and by the way, we don't know when you're coming back, so make sure you take everything. And we need to make sure you're okay when you get home in your space. Do you have the proper computer and technology? And it's a resource conversation at that point. So that was a whole process in itself when, to be honest, we didn't even think about partnerships. We didn't think about the business. Like, we really were just focused on team members. So once I would say that got settled, for us, luckily on the NBA side, we were on the back end of our season. So we were roughly 80% through. We had 5 Cavs home games left. We had about 12 road games. Again, we had some events, concerts, Cirque du Soleil shows, the MAC tournament, but it wasn't a huge chunk. Most of our home games were played on the front end of our schedule. There are some teams that still had 10 home games left, right? There was a lot more impact than just 5 and so forth. So that was a big impact for us. Canceling our Monsters, hockey season, then the Charge season. For us, of those 5 games that were remaining was the Lakers and the Bucks. So when you think of revenue sources, that one hurt. Those 2 hurt. And that's something that we had to manage and work from there. I remain, to Colie, like, again, she's in a that part was, from a revenue stream is better that you didn't rely on fans. For us, we need those fans, because events is a big source of our revenue streams. And so that one, hurt us. And I'd say when you think of impact, the inability to see and engage with clients and new clients, like, try talking to a prospect that you can't even see or talk to, and how do you build a rapport and, have a drink or a cocktail, like all of that, right, gone. And for how long, nobody knows. We were just focused on keeping people safe and in their homes, quarantined. So I think there was a lot of impacts in that space of revenue loss. Like those 5 games, all of that meant revenue was lost or impacted, I would say. Luckily, we've been working with our partners very closely, and we have great relationships. When something like this happens, you throw everything out of the window. You throw your contracts out of the window from a certain standpoint, and you really focus on relationships, because we were just as focused as how are our partners doing, because they were going through the exact same thing at the exact same time, right? So we can't talk about business. Like we want to make sure they're safe and they're okay, and they're going through these processes, and they're having to furlough their own employees, and we're trying to get payments and partnerships. And so really it became just trying to be like from a humanity standpoint, to approach every single partner differently. We literally set up and called every single partner just to check in. We just want to know how you're doing. Where are you? And to keep in touch. That communication piece became very important. I think when you think of impact to the business, I would say there was also a lot of opportunity. Communication. We had to get real creative on that. And I'm sure we all are now very versed with virtual communication. I look at it, over the last few months, we've been doing these wine tastings with prospects where we bring them and their spouses out in the evening and have one of our Cavs legends or one of our executives to do just sort of a wine taste and talk. And they actually love it. So it's been a way for us to engage with people that we can't go see right now. So, to keep the business engagement going. We've been delivering personal notes and masks and, things of that nature. But look, I would say the biggest thing for us right now is also keeping engaged. So downtown, there's not much going on, as I'm sure many downtowns across the country, right, with businesses closed. But we are looking at our arena, our Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, as a sort of a community hub to bring back the heartbeat of downtown Cleveland. So we've been actually over the last couple weeks engaging in cornhole tournament, in camps and clinics. You
guys want a bowling lane? I could bring one to you guys.
Hey, Colie, we are open, so we should talk after this.
All right.
To a whole nother level right now. And look, that's the thing. You talk about how's the business impact. Is it driving a ton of revenue? No. But is it getting the movement back? And look, it's driving some revenue and keeping sort of the heartbeat and energy going for what's going on, because we're in a different world right now. So yes, a lot of impacts to the business.
Great, thanks. And I don't know if there's a finder's fee for the bowling lane, but if so, we can talk about that later. But all right, let me go back to Jennifer. You raised a really interesting point that fighters want to fight, and fighters aren't by their nature very necessarily as concerned about their health and safety. So there wasn't as much concern about actual contraction of the virus. And then you had started to talk about Florida, and then you broke up. So let me kick it back
Yeah.
over to you, and fingers crossed that the connection's good.
I apologize. Let me know if you can't hear me. Yeah, effectively, can you hear me?
That was a joke. That was a joke. Sorry.
I didn't see your sarcasm flag go up. Yeah, like Colie noted, we effective, or the UFC effectively forum shopped. Figured out which jurisdiction was going to allow it and which jurisdiction would allow as much bandwidth as they could. We started the first event back was a series of 3 events in Jacksonville in mid-April. And interestingly, those were the least stringent COVID guidelines. People tested when they got there. They were just in the regular hotel. I booked.
Jennifer, the audio is still.
Oh no!
Choppy. And one of my former students is blaming my sarcasm on cutting your audio out. So
I think the former student is correct. Anyhow, so the ancillary issues, the travel, the weight cuts, the coaches not having gyms available was the biggest issue for the fighters themselves, and the UFC's safeguards for the testing. The testing itself was continuous and comprehensive, but the isolations were not until recently.
Thank you, Jennifer. Let me go to my former fellow undrafted free agent, Eric. And Eric, tell us both, I want to hear your perspective on just how things have changed in your role in the Center for Sport at Tulane, and then also putting your former NFL player hat on. What is your perspective on the NFL trying to return in the middle of a pandemic? And then I'll have some follow-up questions based on the chat after that.
Well, no, first of all, thank you for having me on. I think we weren't exempt from what happened with most organizations. We had parts of our operations suspended and postponed. Our clinical operations services, we have 2 main contracts, one with the trust powered by the NFLPA and one with the NFL through the NFL Player Care Foundation. Individuals typically come down, they fly in, come down to our clinic that's dedicated to them in New Orleans, with travel being limited, with anxiety. Obviously that was halted. We had to now just rely on individuals that were in driving distance to come to our clinic. So from a contractual standpoint, our whole purpose was to keep our contracts moving. We knew that there was players out there that still needed to be cared for from a clinical standpoint. I think it was really engaging with those individuals and finding avenues to engage with them to make sure that they understood how they could get down to our clinic, how they could go through the process still have a safe, reliable appointment. It was challenges on our NFL Player Care end, where we travel to different cities typically to do cardiovascular and prostate screenings. That program has been halted for the time being. We're still trying to research avenues of how we can go to different cities, especially some of the cities that have higher spikes in the virus, to go there to still serve those individuals. But I think from a standpoint from the center, it's really forced us to think creatively, like many of you have said, about engaging the different populations we serve. From an educational standpoint, a lot of this stuff has been Zoom, limited meetings, but a lot of the virtual education pieces that were there, focusing on some of the issues around the virus with mental health, especially with some of our higher risk populations. From a research end as well, we're trying to really find different avenues to continue some of our research from a cardiovascular standpoint, from aging. Also, we have a brain bank, and it sounds odd, but unfortunately, we had individuals that have passed away. They've donated their brain tissue to us, but there's challenges in getting those items delivered to us, getting a diener out to the locations to extract the brain tissue. So just really trying to find creative ways to continue our contracts and keep things moving. And just, I guess, to your point of the former player hat, which I've taken off. I've took off a long time ago. In my slimmer days, I was a player, as I always say. I think as a player, individuals are itching to get back to some type of normalcy. Being in the locker room, being around the guys, being around the game that they love. I think the challenge is the anxiety, the unknown, planning around some of these aspects. Some of the things that's happening with MLB, flare-ups with the people testing positive. From a football standpoint, it's full contact. To practice efficiently, it's a full contact sport. To prepare for the season, you must have that contact leading up to the season. If you don't, there's some other issues with individuals getting hurt, individuals not performing at the capacity they would normally perform to. The cancellation of the preseason, now that's costing individuals jobs. Some of those borderline individuals that really needed that to be on film, really needed to be in front of the coaches, don't have that opportunity. So it's a larger impact, not only on the player, but also the families as well. And it's a house of cards. You remove one or one thing happens and it's a domino effect and the whole thing falls apart. So if we don't approach this the right way and do things in the right manner from a safety standpoint, we'll have some bigger issues.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. So let me go to some of the chat questions, and there is a lot of overlap in the questions. So I'm going to try to synthesize the questions from Jared, and I apologize if I got any names wrong here. Jared Ryback, David Price. I assume this is not the David Price, the Major League Baseball pitcher who opted out of the season this year, but let me know if it is. Mike Stevenson, Tom Cairns, and Joel Silvershine. And the broad question is, we're less than a week into the Major League Baseball season. The Major League Baseball players did not want to do a bubble because, unlike the TBT, for example, the NBA season that only has 8 games left for the regular season, they're trying to do a 60-game season in Major League Baseball and then playoffs, and players didn't want to be away from their families for that long, among other reasons. So they are, and rather than do 1 or 2 sites, they are going from city to city, state to state, and there's already been an outbreak in the Marlins, and multiple games have been canceled. So for a sport like the NFL that plans to operate outside a bubble as well, at least for now, what do we think are the chances that they can pull it off? And I'll ask Greg to chime in on this too. What are the chances that they can pull it off outside of a bubble? Or is it's inevitable? We know that some players are going to test positive. I don't think anyone expected an outbreak within one team this quickly. So what does it mean for the NFL, NHL, and the collision and contact sports? Dan, you're on mute, but go ahead if you want to jump in.
Gabe, I think what I would say is that it's pretty clear that there must have been somebody on the Marlins that was symptomatic and that was transmitting that in a super spreader environment. The individuals that we tested positive, I think we had 4 individuals at the Columbus facility that we had. Each were asymptomatic, and we didn't learn of any subsequent positive tests as a result of that. And so it seems clear to me that there was some lack of education, either on behalf of the Marlins staff, Major League Baseball. Somebody dropped the ball when it comes to informing people of what the dangers are, particularly if you're symptomatic with the virus. And so as a result of that, I don't see a scenario even under which everybody starts testing negative within the next 3 days that you can permit that team to play at any point in the next 14 days. Everywhere they go, every individual that they contact is going to be potentially exposed. And so if the goal is to minimize transmission outside of the circle that you're competing in, There's just no way, especially under CDC recommendations, that you're supposed to not only quarantine, but self-isolate, which means that you stay in your room on your own. You have meals delivered to you. You don't interact with any other human being for a period of 14 days after a positive test. There's just no way that you can compete after that. And so from that perspective, I'm skeptical about whether the NFL can actually proceed if they don't at least have team-wide quarantines or team-wide bubbles. And what that essentially means is you have to be alone and only interact with your teammates. And you have to be willing to undertake that, or else, you're running the risk of having something like that happen. Locker rooms in particular, if you look at when the European leagues came back, particularly in soccer and in Germany in basketball, they eliminated the use of locker rooms. There's a reason for that. Like as much as athletes, and having been one myself, as much as you love that locker room interaction, that's one of the most dangerous places that you can be, is inside of a locker room, especially if you know that not everyone is quarantined. So we eliminated them. We didn't have any locker rooms. We had curtains that framed our court, and you couldn't see it, but just off to the side, we had other curtained off areas that were wide open, just in the off chance that something could happen. And so for me, I'm skeptical, to be totally honest, that unless there's a serious effort to quarantine teams themselves, that they could do it. If they do that, then I think they can in turn compete in an inter-city basis, but they have to have some level of self-quarantine amongst the team itself.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great perspective. And I will say, part of the question was also what can we learn from the Korean Baseball League and that they've been able to successfully pull it off. And if you look at the latest round of testing from our domestic pro leagues, so the NBA, and there may be more recent information, but what I've seen, 0 out of the last 348 tests are positive. NHL 2 out of 800 are positive. MLS 0 out of 884 are positive, and WNBA 7 out of 137 positive. And then you look at the Marlins, and there's, I don't know if this is true, but certainly what's being reported is that the players were able to make the decision about whether they wanted to play their game on Sunday night after, I don't know if it was a positive test or there was just a presumed positive, and they decided to, and the NWSL 0 positives as well, but that the Marlins players were able to choose, and that the Nationals players were deciding whether or not they were going to travel to Miami, and just highlights, I think, Dan's point that we certainly cannot leave this up to the players about whether they're going to play or not. And this reminds me a little bit of concussion issues. The players want to play. We've got to take it out of their hands and make the decisions on what's safest, and particularly, unlike a concussion, as far as I'm aware, but Greg's the expert on this, concussions aren't contagious. So it's not only that you're putting yourself at risk, but putting the others around you at risk, and potentially the whole league. So we'll see what happens. But anyone else want to chime in on those? Go ahead, Shelly.
Yeah, I would just say, this I think is unique. When typically you look at leagues, I know as we look at other leagues are competitive. We're fighting for the same consumer, the same revenue in many instances. And so there's a lot of competition, but this is one scenario. The Marlins situation is very unfortunate because if one league fails, it affects all of us, because they're kind of looking at it as a template. So you really are I think, and this is the one instance of a pandemic to say every league is rooting for each other to be successful. I think the NBA was in a different place. We were finishing, this bubble is us finishing our season. We're going to have to reevaluate and figure the long term because we want to have our full 82 game season when it comes back. But I just think it's unfortunate because it's going to really impact everyone as you watch these things come about.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it was also, I was nervous for sports and nervous for Dan watching the TBT because I know people, I can imagine. Just how much pressure there was, and again, to show that it could be done and could be done in a safe way, obviously with challenges. Let's see. So this is a focus here is on pro sports, but we're Tulane and we have our football team doctor here and one of the chair of the American Athletic Conference COVID Advisory Committee, or whatever fancy title it is. How do we see college sports proceeding? And there's a point raised by Brandon Wasserman in here that for some college athletes, at least, the safest place they can be is on campus with protocols and testing in place. But that doesn't necessarily answer what happens when the non-athlete students come back to campus and when two teams play each other when they have to travel. So Greg, let me open it to you, and then anybody else who wants to chime in, feel free.
You know, I think the Marlins really kind of opened everybody's eyes. I think that we're all watching that. We want them to be successful. To Shelly's point, everyone's kind of rooting for each other right now. We're actually at college level, not glad to see it happen, but are going to learn from it. So from that standpoint, we're glad it happened to somebody else and not us. We're sorry it happened to all, but we're going to watch what the Marlins do and what MLB does from the standpoint of how do they get through this and what do they do? You know, Dan's comment about, you know, once they're positive, you know, that's 10 days minimum with at least 24 to 48 hours of being asymptomatic before they come back. All of their close contacts are 14 days. And there's no testing out now. You know, for a while, CDC would let you test out, but now it's only a time issue. So everyone that is participating not in a bubble, MLB, NFL, and what college sports will be once the students return to campus are very interested in watching this. So we don't know what's going to come from it, but that's the concern. So we're watching them closely.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And let me go back to Jennifer. We'll tempt fate with your audio, but I want to ask, and this is a question, if anyone else has thoughts, chime in as well. But what I've been thinking about through all this, and this is obviously not sports specific, but what is the silver lining from what we're going through in the last few months? And more specifically, what have you learned about the way you run your business that maybe you can apply when things go hopefully back to normal, whether that's a new normal or the old normal? But is there something where you said, you know what, I could have been doing this all along, or I'm able to do this a better way? And you know, you wear a lot of different hats, and so I'm curious to hear what your experience is and what you can learn from it.
First, can you hear me? Is this better?
Yes.
Oh,
I can hear you now.
Excellent. I think first and foremost is making sure that your force majeure provisions are tight and exist. Contractually, it's been a big deal for a lot of our sponsors. I think like Shelly's sort of recitation of the efforts that they have taken to keep connected with their other streams of income. I wish I had taken notes. I mean, I think those were brilliant and proactive. And it's something that I think that we tried to do to a certain extent. Like Shelly noted, the sponsors are also in a terrible position, and as much as our fighters, not knowing when they're going to fight next and, not knowing what their income is going to look like, would love to have that sponsor money. You don't want to jeopardize the sponsorship relationship either between the fighter and the sponsor or the agency and the sponsor by insisting on contractual normalcy when we're in such an abnormal time. Effectively, we left that in all cases, we advise the clients as to what their contractual obligations are, what we think, the likelihood of the sponsor being amenable to changed terms are, or, in some cases, the athletes weren't willing to renegotiate any of the obligations or any of the terms. I think in going through the process, it was such an unusual time for all of us. It was hard to be an expert in telling our clients what was going to happen. We just didn't know. We were scheduled to fight in California, and the week prior that got pulled. Then we got moved to Florida. And nothing was normal, so it's really hard to say what we learned a lot of lessons, and you just don't know how they're going to apply again, because you hope you never have to go through a pandemic again. You asked what the sort of the silver linings were. To a certain extent, being on ESPN during prime time, where your competition was live cornhole. On the other hand, your lead-ins were live cornhole. So while you got more time and more traction, and you see, the ESPN scrolls were fighters from the preliminary cards, they've never seen their names on ESPN before. That was a huge reach out for a lot of them. The numbers went up precipitously, but not as much as I would have thought. And in large part because people weren't thinking sports were on. And so they weren't watching, the Cavs game that led into the UFC fight. So they just continued to watch. But I would say that, the exposure that the UFC got for successfully undertaking to start sports again, and being on ESPN to a new audience was our silver lining.
Yeah,
I share in that silver lining. For us, as I alluded to earlier, we had those windows, which we would have never been given, but the rising tide, floats all ships. And if you're not watching TV because you don't think sports are on, those windows don't mean anything. I will say though, for our June shows, we did, 4.5 million viewers over the course of a couple of weeks. And that's huge for us. And half of them were new viewers. So for me, it was, and maybe Jennifer, you saw this too, it's just new audiences that we were able to reach that we never thought we could reach before.
Which is huge. That's exactly what we need for the sport to grow and sort of gain traction as a recognized major sport. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. That's another question. This one from Justin Berger. So we've seen repercussions for NBA players who've left the bubble, and there's a well-known story now of a player who in Atlanta broke protocol. But today, the University of Arizona football team suspended a player for breaking COVID protocol. This is for specifically for Dan or Colie, but anyone can feel free to jump in. But did you guys have any policies for participants who broke protocol? And more generally, how should we think about punitive measures for those who don't follow COVID-related policies?
We did. Our plan basically called for anyone that left the bubble to be eliminated from the tournament. And so we had the luxury of being a single elimination event where everyone that enters TBT is not an employee or even a subcontractor, their entrance in contest. And so from a legal perspective, we can basically set the rules as we want to set them. As it pertains to leagues, they have to balance a lot of different obligations as it pertains to CBAs, individual contracts and things along those lines. Even within the UFC, I know that those fighters are under contract with the UFC as well. So there are obligations on that front. From a college athletics standpoint, the young man today that got suspended from Arizona State, sounds like he also got his scholarship reduced. And, that to me is a real difficult situation for him. I don't understand exactly what transpired there. It does sound pretty draconian, but you can't mess around when it comes to the risk that you're taking, particularly when you start looking at the dollars that are involved, frankly. For sports. It just is too expensive of a proposition to have one individual potentially not comply with what you're asking them to do, and then potentially ruin the whole thing.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm going to do one last question and then turn it back over to Greg. And this is a question for. Let me see. This is a lot of pressure to pick one last question among all that are here. So it's a question from Evan. And what are the implications for services like fantasy sports, DraftKings, et cetera, when a team like the Marlins or others end up not playing games or key players have to sit out for a number of games? And I want to generalize the question a little bit more just beyond fantasy sports or daily fantasy sports or sports gambling, but in terms of relationships with sponsors and your ticket holders, if they are paying to see the Cleveland Cavaliers and then the team that is on the court is, think about the Brooklyn Nets, the team that they have in the bubble, people haven't heard of most of those players. They're incredible players, but it's not Kevin Durant.
If you're a Nets fan, you've heard of the players. So let's.
All right, fair enough. Fine. So my question was terrible. I withdraw. But how do you handle that and all the sort of cascading collateral impacts that the players sitting out or teams not being able to play might have? And that's for all of you. And Shelly, how you're reaching out to sponsors and how your staff is reaching out to season ticket holders, how you sell in the middle and contract in the middle of so much uncertainty.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Look, when you talk about contracts, it's like I said, we luckily have very strong force majeure language, but it really goes out the window to a certain degree when I say, like for us, when we were finishing our season, it's like going to a movie theater, watching 80% of the movie, and then it just cuts off, right? So the movie theater is going to say, well, you had an experience, you had a great time, you kind of got it, so we'll just give you a credit for another movie on us. And then the customer might say, well, no, give me my money back. Like, it's ruined now. I don't know the end of the movie, right? So where do you land in that? And it's subjective. We have language, in our contract to lock us in, but am I going to jeopardize X amount of dollars for this portion of our season and risk the renewal for the next 6 years of a partnership? And the answer is no, I won't do that. So I think when you bring this, it's the same with fans. It becomes a trust factor. It becomes a relationship factor of listening. Content is going to be different right now. We're 1 in 3 chances of having #1 draft pick next year in our lottery and our draft. That's what we're talking about right now. You're going to see things differently. And I think the good thing is that most partners and most fans understand that. They understand that this is not normal. It's not normal sitting at your house and executing all of your business and everything else. So I think the good thing is everybody's going through this. I remember going through like the Gulf oil spill or Hurricane Katrina, like it affected Southern businesses and states more than other regions, right? This affects everybody. And I just think that because of that, we're getting a lot more flexibility from our fans. And by that, we're trying to do more with them right now also. We're going over and beyond to say, look, we're going to be flexible. We don't have any leverage right now. We don't know I can't tell you what the next 2 months are going to have in store. So just work with us on a week by week basis, and we'll get through this together. So it's just, I would say flexibility is where we're coming from that, and trying to over deliver on content, especially digital and social content.
Great, thanks, Shelly. Any last words from our other panelists? Eric, I'm going to put you on the spot. What are the chances that the NFL plays a full season this year?
In my opinion, very slim chance. Yeah, very slim. And, just to kind of add on what Shelly was saying, I think on the flip side, from the player standpoint, is as more positive cases occur in these different leagues, you'll get more of these players opting out and choosing not to play. And I think there's a positive in that as well from a media spin of leagues are going to have to appropriately know how to communicate the safety of the players over some of the economic pieces that are in play, because these individuals aren't on a team. Team chemistry is not there. They may not win. Sponsorship may be down. So I think there's a flip side to all that, but I highly doubt there's going to be a full season.
Thank you for your optimism, but also your
trying to be honest.
Your honesty. Let me thank you very quickly to all the panelists. This was awesome. I appreciate you taking the time. Let me flip it back over to Greg for closing remarks.
No, I as we bring this episode of Plug In, I want to thank all the panelists. This is obviously something that we could have gone on for quite some time. Maybe if we'd had someone else asking the questions, it would have been even easier. But if it has to be Gabe, then it has to be Gabe. But I want to thank all of y'all for participating tonight and this evening with everything that y'all, the insights, very interesting. Thank you. I guess I have to thank Gabe for hosting with me. And I want to thank the special projects and development folks who are all behind the scenes with all their help and support for tonight's event. I want to thank everybody for attending. Stay healthy and stay safe, and good night to everybody. Thank you all.
Night.
Thanks all.